When Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah, we'll give him a hearty welcome then, hurrah, hurrah. The men will cheer, the boys will shout, the ladies, they will all turn out, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. The old church bell will peal with joy, hurrah, hurrah, to welcome home our darling boy, hurrah, hurrah. The village lads and lassies say with roses they wish through the way, and we'll all feel gay when Johnny comes marching home. Get ready for the troops will be.
Hello, I'm John Roberts. I suppose the most important thing I might have accomplished in life is being the nephew of Bill Stonecipher, the leader of the world's greatest generation. Several years ago, I begged my Uncle Bill to make a videotape about his life and about his exploits during World War II. It took several years of nagging and picking on him to get him to make this video, but I'm happy to be at least a part of this story. The events that we will be describing occurred more than 50 years ago. It involves a young man that grew up in Livingston, Tennessee, played football, basketball, baseball, was a good boxer, an athlete, and he left here shortly after World War II started and ended up flying a B-26 bomber and flying several missions in France and Germany, and played an important role, as did millions of Americans, in defeating Nazi Germany and bringing an end to World War II. This is Bill Stonecipher being interviewed by John Roberts, his nephew. It's February of 1999, and the purpose of this interview is to try to make some kind of historical record about things that Bill Stonecipher has participated in, wars he's fought, and women he's loved, Germans he's killed. Good afternoon, Bill.
Good afternoon, John.
If you don't mind, I'm not sure that I know the answer to this question. Were you born in Livingston?
Yes.
Where were you born? At your family home?
I was born in the house that I later grew up in.
House over on Robert Street.
House on Robert Street.
And known as the Stonecipher home for years and years and years.
Yes.
And your father was John Stonecipher.
That's true.
And your mother was Ida Jones Stonecipher.
Yes.
And they were from up in Scott County.
Yes.
Moved to Overton County, Tennessee when?
About 1906. They were married in, I think in Sunbright, in that area over there, and had a couple of, or three moves prior to moving to Cookville, and then from Cookville to Livingston, I think, in 1906.
And how many children were there in the family?
at that time, I don't know exactly if I could count them up, but I think there were about 4 at that time. My youngest brother, Walter, was born here. So there were about 3 ahead of him, I think.
And there was, I believe, 2 children that was born in Cookville that died as infants.
No, one son, John, died as an infant. A daughter, Mina, lived till she was about 6 or 7 years old. And she did die in Cookville.
And the next oldest child would have been Homer?
No, Homer was the oldest.
Homer was older than John and Mina, then?
Yes.
Okay. And then the next child after John and Mina would be?
Curtis.
Curtis. And I believe he died in about 1947.
Yes.
And then the next child would be? Helen. And then the next child would be Walter. And then my mother, Marie Stonecipher Roberts. And then Janie Stonecipher Stevens, married to Q.L. Stevens. And then you would be the baby in the family.
Yes.
And what year were you born?
1923.
23. Okay. Well, if you will, I know you don't remember what the world was like in 1923, but maybe you remember what it was like in 1930 or 31 in Livingston. Can you recall anything about that?
I can recall. I'm not sure of the years, but it was probably before 1930. I can remember when the public square was not paved. It got very dusty and dirty and muddy. There were no street lights, there were no telephones, there were no electric lights, and there was no indoor plumbing. I can remember all those years without those things, when just about everybody you knew raised a garden. Almost everybody had a cow, and many people had several chickens, and most people had a garden. So people raised a great deal of what they consumed in the way of pork and beef and milk and eggs. And the town, as I recall, in the late 20s was a fairly bustling place. On Saturdays, just about everyone who could find a way would come to town and spend the day doing their shopping and heading back to their farms. And a lot of the travel in those days was done by mule-drawn wagons. And some people would ride a mule or a horse to get to town and do their business. Very common sight to see dozens of wagons parked around the square, around the courthouse in Livingston when I was a young boy.
And this would be about 1930.
I'd say before 30. I'm talking prior to 30, I think.
Was the square pretty well completed with businesses all the way around?
No, there were a few vacant spots. There was a vacant spot where Dillis's store now stands.
You're talking about the old Livingston Furniture Company store, and currently occupied by Overton Department Store.
Probably.
Next between E.B. Gray's Jewelry and what is now known as a bookstore. And if you could go back years and years, we'd be talking about Fleming and Myers Department Store on one side of it, and Western Auto Store in my memory, and I don't know what might have been there earlier.
But yeah, that's how I remember Western Auto. And there was a vacant spot where the post office now is. When I grew up, the post office was not there. It was on the opposite corner of the square, the north corner, going towards Salina. As you go towards Salina, the first building on the right was a grocery store, and the next building was the post office. And so there was a vacant spot where the post office now is. There was a vacant spot between what at that time was the Lansdowne Coward drugstore and where Speck Brothers now is. A moving picture theater eventually was there, but in my youth that was an open space. A lot of events would show up there. Things like boxing matches would be held there, and motorcycle events, circus events would be shown there. I remember as a child, the first hot air balloon I ever saw was launched from that very spot. and some young daredevil rode the basculous balloon up into the air and got a couple of thousand feet up and pulled the cord and came floating down in a parachute. It was quite an event for me as a young kid and for people in town, for that matter. I can also remember when barnstorming by World War I type aviators was a big deal. They would fly over the town and the whole town would stop the business to run out and see this airplane. And sometimes they would land in a vacant field a few miles out of town, and for 50 cents or so they would take you for a ride.
Did it inspire you to want to be a pilot?
I was inspired from early on to do that, yes.
Moving on into a different direction just a little bit, do you recall, or was it impressed upon you in those years that the country was in a state of economic depression?
It wasn't really stamped onto me. I sort of absorbed it, I think, gradually, from hearing the older people talk and realizing that money was scarce. And the word depression sort of appeared into my vocabulary. But I don't recall ever feeling that it was a terrible situation. In later years, I realized how bad it was, but I didn't know it then, if that's your question.
Yeah. Your dad, was he in the Gate City Mill Company at that time?
Yes, he was.
Down on Church Street, just off the square in the direction of Salina. And so he was in business at that time?
Yes.
And now, on the street that you grew up on, I know that up at the top of Roberts Street is where Governor Roberts lived. Did he live there at that time?
No, I never knew Governor Roberts. I never even saw his home. I know his home did rest there, but it was gone before my time.
Was there an elementary school there?
Yes.
In your earliest recollection?
My earliest recollection is the school was there.
And is that where you went to elementary school?
Yes, it is.
Now, the stone house that is on the right side of that street, going up the hill toward the elementary school, was that Dr. Doak Capps' home?
Yes.
And I gather that his sons Joe and Doak Capps were friends of yours.
Yeah, very much so.
And then in the home that the brick house just below that, the stone house, where Baxter Smith lived, was that house there in your?
No, that was an open field. I've flown kites in that field many times, played football in that field. It was a garden Thomas Copeland had. So that house was built by Jerry Smith later on, probably in 1930, somewhere in there.
Then Thomas Copeland lived in the white frame house at the corner of Robert Street and Cedar Street, I believe.
Is that Henson Street?
Henson Street, okay.
Yes, yes.
And then Jim Lanston, was he living in across
Yes,
the road in the stucco house that we call the Burris Brown home now?
Jim Lanston, that's true.
And then across the Henson Street, it was an alley in your earliest recollection that separated the Stonecipher home from the Benton Young home.
Correct.
Where the Methodist Church is now, or the Methodist Recreation Center.
Yes.
And Livingston Academy, was it on the land next to the elementary school?
Yes, it was.
And that's where you went to high school?
Yes.
And were you an athlete?
Well, there was some question about that. I came from an athletic family and felt like I had some history to uphold somehow, because I kept being reminded what great athletes my two older brothers were. So I did attempt to play football, baseball, and basketball while I was in high school.
And where were you when World War II started? And I'll start off by saying when in September of 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, were you in high school?
September 39, I was in high school, yes.
What year were you in?
I don't know. I'll have to work backward, but I graduated in the spring of 41. So in 39, I've probably been sophomore.
In the years, say between 1930 and 1939, did you, and boys your age, did you think that you might have to fight Germany someday?
No question about it. we grew up knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that we would go to war, and we would go to war against Germany. No question that we played war. Someone always had to play the part of the German. And yes, it was there.
Is there some reason, or were there comic books that depicted war with Germany, or was there some type of I hesitate to say propaganda, but something that caused children to know that they might have to fight Germany or would have to fight Germany?
I don't know what it was, because moving pictures weren't as widespread as they are now, but there were a few World War I type movies. You stop to think about it, in 1930, when I was old enough to start comprehending things, World War I had only been over by about 10 or 11 years. There were people in this town who had fought in World War I. It was very much in everyone's memory of World War I. So it was, I can't point to any one thing that caused me and the people with whom I grew up believe that someday we would have to fight the Germans again, but it did happen.
What perception did you and your generation have of the Japanese at that time?
Probably not much, except to realize that they were sort of an emerging country, and anything quote made in Japan was of inferior quality. So Japan didn't really become very much in our awareness, I would say, until the late 30s or rather early 30s, when Japan and China started fighting each other. And then that was in the news. So we began, when I'm 12, 13 years old, we began to realize that there is a terrible war going on between Japan and China. So it just sort of crept in.
And you perceived the Japanese to be the bad guys?
No, not necessarily at that stage. I don't think we knew who we were to think were the bad guys.
Okay, and now I believe you said you graduated from high school in the spring or summer of 1941.
Yes.
And I gather that the imminence of war was pretty noticeable to everybody at that time.
Yes.
There was people being drafted.
Not sure when the draft started, but it was certainly about to start if it had. I think it may have already. But people were beginning to join up. Guys that I knew right out of high school went straight into the Navy or the Army. So it was imminent enough that a lot of people did not wait for the draft. In fact, it didn't even exist at that time.
Now, most people, certainly your age, can remember where they were on December 7th, 1941.
Yes.
And recall that day with
Yes.
some real detail to remembrance. What were you doing that day?
Well, let me just back up. On November the 23rd, 1941, I became 18 years of age. I was a freshman at Tennessee Tech. And on December the 7th, 10 days exactly to the day, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And I had been here in Livingston and had gone back to Cookville to go back to school with Sunday. And was sitting in a little restaurant down on the west end of Cookville where the two 70s merged together, if you remember the old Nashville Highway. There was a little restaurant in that little fork in the road. And my college roommate and I, a guy named S.Q. Ledbetter, who later was shot down in Germany, were sitting in there and drinking a cup of coffee, and we overheard a young man in uniform talking about the fact that, yes, he will have to report back to his duty station. So we started listening and finally joined with him, and he told us that the Japanese had just bombed Pearl Harbor. I heard it from him, not from the radio.
And that was, I think, a place that we used, when I was at Tennessee Tech, we called that restaurant the Triangle.
Yes,
And,
it had a name. I think that was it, yeah.
And there was an intersection that came together out there for probably Broad and Spring Street, and when it run into Highway 70, I guess.
Yeah. It's been a long time since I was there, but I'm sure we're talking about the same spot.
Well, were you able to stay in school for another year? Or?
Yeah. A lot of people in that time started thinking about what branch of service we should join. And it wasn't very long before the Marine Corps, the Army, and the Navy started appearing on campus to do some recruiting. And they all had reserve plans by which, if you signed up for their reserve program, you would be allowed to remain in school until you graduated. And upon graduation, then you would be required to enter into a period of active duty. And the active duty period would last until the hostilities were over. We refer to that as the duration. And the Army Air Corps had a program in which I joined. And I was sworn in Chattanooga in June of 1942 into the Army Air Corps Reserve. And it was a cadet training program, and if you could successfully complete the cadet program, you would be a pilot, or a navigator, or a bombardier, and would be commissioned as a second lieutenant. And so I did join that and was sworn in June 1942. Well, my morale was pretty low. I had a bad year on my football and hadn't done as well as I wanted to. Calculus was giving me a problem. So I wrote the Air Corps and said, come and get me, I'm ready to go to active duty. About 2 weeks later, I was in basic training at Miami Beach in Florida, in the regular Army basic training. But I was ticketed to be in their aviation cadet program. And it was automatic that when I completed the basic, I moved into what was called the aviation cadet program.
But you didn't have any flight training there?
Not there, no.
Where did you go for flight training?
From there, I went to a place up in Pennsylvania. The Army Air Corps had what they called a pre-cadet program. And they established these pre-cadet programs at various colleges in the United States. I was sent to the one in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, at a place called the Kutztown State Teachers College, along with about 300 other guys. And there we went through a pre-cadet program where we studied a lot of technical stuff and liberal stuff, sort of a college broadening experience, a little bit of military education, but a lot of military life. A lot of drilling and formation, this kind of stuff. And there I got my first 10 hours of flight instruction at a Piper Cub in Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
And then where did you move from there?
From there to San Antonio, Texas.
Blackwood Air Force Base?
To the Aviation Cadet Classification Center. Here we were put through a bunch of psychological tests, mental tests, physical tests to determine, number one, where we were equipped to learn to fly, and if so, what kind of duties did they feel we would best be suited for? And I was classified as a pilot, and all this testing took about 6 weeks maybe. So upon completion of that testing, I was moved across into another area of the base for what we call pre-flight.
And when did you start flying military aircraft?
Well, from, yeah, just unsnap it on the end there. On completion of pre-flight, which gave us a lot of ground school. We had to learn how airplanes flew, learned a lot about military procedures and military justice, learned about airplane systems, engines, Morse code, this kind of stuff. And from there, I was sent to Pine Bluff, Arkansas, for my first introduction into military training planes. The props are over there in the little basket.
Okay, and did, first planes I guess you flew were the single engine.
Was it single engine, open cockpit, with no radios,
And an instructor behind you.
An instructor behind, yeah.
Well, how did they determine who was going to fly bombers and who was going to fly fighters?
As you progress through the training, the first phase was called primary, and that was a single engine open cockpit plane. Then you move from that into something called basic. The planes were still a single engine, but they were a little bit more powerful. They had instruments, and we did learn how to fly instruments and do night flying and so forth in basic, which was about a 3-month period of time. During basic, they would give you the opportunity to be either a single engine fighter pilot or a multi-engine bomber pilot. We were given that choice, and I chose to go into multi-engine while I was in basic. And when I completed basic, then I was sent to a place called Frederick, Oklahoma, and started learning how to fly twin-engine planes. And spent 3 months down there and graduated as a pilot and a second lieutenant in the Army Air Corps.
And what type of twin-engine plane did you learn to fly?
Well, they also, as you were going through advanced twin-engine, they gave you some options. You could fly 4-engine or 2-engine. You'd already selected multi. So we were given the choice of what type of plane do we want to fly. There was a B-17, there was a B-24, there was a B-25, there was an A-20, there was a B-26. I had heard a lot about the B-26 and decided that's what I wanted to fly. I put my name in that hat, and sure enough, I was selected to be trained in B-26.
Now, I believe you can show the viewers what that airplane looked like.
Yes, I really, really am glad to let the people see this, because in my mind, this is one of the prettiest planes of its era. It was the fastest bomber that we had during that period of time. And this airplane had a top speed of about something over 300 miles an hour top speed, and it would carry 4,000 pounds of bombs. If you could look underneath here, this was the bomb bay, and you could stack 2 tons of bombs right in here. And for defense, it had